There's a world you're living in. No one else has your part. All God's children in the wind. Take it in and blow hard. Neil Young's song, There's a World, is a key inspiration for our ongoing series of heartfelt conversations with folks from all walks of life. We're diving in and exploring their practice, their process, and how they express their unique genius to help create a more compassionate, wise, and present world. This is your part. Welcome back to Language of the Soul, conversations on healing and growth. I'm Ben Umstead.
And I'm Martin Perkins.
And our guest today is Romey Pittman. Romey is a visionary educator who has led with the question, how can students feel empowered and in charge in their school? She's traversed the full spectrum of educational modalities and structures, including traditional public settings, to Montessori, the Sudbury model, and place-based community approaches. These experiences and more have led Romey to the creation of New Village Academy, a public charter high school with an emphasis on individualized learning and community internships. Welcome to the podcast, Romey.
Thank you so much, Ben and Martin. It's so great to be here. Excited for this conversation.
In your bio through New Village Academy, I zoomed in on the statement that you've been involved in the founding of 6 schools, either as the school leader or a school leader or as a consultant. And I thought, in so many ways, when we think of any aspiration in the world, you are, by definition, a creator, right? You create. Your current endeavor, New Village Academy, is at this very interesting crossroads. And my sense is that while it's a challenging place, it may be just the place for us to start our conversation. So where are you within yourself around that endeavor?
Yeah, so it's so interesting that this podcast is happening today. Today is the last day of the fiscal year for us, which means that it is sort of a pivot point where our grant funding and our relationship with our school district that is authorizing us, that they are making some big decisions today, or we're making some big decisions today about whether we're moving forward with our launch process. So we spent in some ways the last 30 years, in some ways the last 3 years, and in very sort of literal terms, full-time, the last 2 years working on launching New Village Academy, and had setbacks each of those 2 years that required that we sort of step back and delay for a year. And this year we weren't sure whether we would move forward at all. We were ready. I was ready to pack it up and go home and just say, I am done with this work. It's been really hard. I think a little bit like childbirth, when you first, after you've just had a baby, the idea of having another is inconceivable. Like, hell no, would I ever do that again, and then you get a little distance and it's like, okay, I could do that. And so I've gotten back to a place where I want to see this vision happen and I want to work again, full steam ahead on it. And so now today is the day where we find out whether we've got others with us on that. So yeah, it's a crazy sort of uncertainty moment, which has been, I think, my reality really for 2 years of just living so much in this kind of crazy, liminal space of not knowing whether we're going to pull it off or not.
And dwelling in such unknowing uncertainty. What are your practices? Like what do you do in the midst of that uncertainty? Because everyone who's out there seeking to create or something, they're going to face not one of these, but almost a constant state of uncertainties. What are your practices mentally, emotionally, maybe even spiritually around it?
I think it's a combination of mostly informal and kind of intuitive things. I was having a conversation yesterday with a former student, and we were talking about in my teenage years, I was really into canoeing and spent a lot of time in the outdoors and did this one big crazy trip in the Northwest Territories in Canada for 30 days. And I think that outdoor experience as a young person, like, there were miserable times and, terrible mosquitoes. And, I built some pretty good sort of resiliency muscles and pretty deep confidence that like I can pretty much do anything I put my mind to if I just, put my shoulder into it and go. And so I think that kind of core sense of myself as somebody who can get something done and who can survive difficult times is kind of at the center of it, really. And then I think, I do some breathing and, I guess meditation. It's sort of my own version. I do some yoga, I have some practices, but I think, being in the woods, walking in the woods, I live on a farm where I get to have nature around me all the time and really leverage that really, that feeds me. And then I think also deep, long-term friendships have sustained me through all kinds of crazy stuff. And that sense of connection, I think, is a huge source of stability and grounding for me.
Right. I was thinking that as you were speaking, that quality of can-do-itedness has always been, at least during the 30 years that I've known you, that's always been sort of a calling card of Romey Pittman, we can do it,
Yeah.
and yet there's a sense of clarity and grounding that I hear in your speaking today that's, I was a part of that founding team back 30 years ago with Fairhaven that you and others led, and I played a small part in all that. And there's a way in which you speak of it today. And I'm curious, like, as an example, what would you say to the Romy of 30 years ago? What advice would you give her that you've gleaned through these 30 years of 6 schools that you've been involved with, right?
Wow, that's an interesting question. There's so much there. I mean, in many ways, I think I'm the same person. I'm a little bullheaded, a little, maybe a little impulsive and sort of, but I think, I think what happened in between was a process of, I think I was in the founding of Fairhaven School with a sort of assuredness that I had the right answers, or that, the model we were using was the be all end all. And I still maybe have that now, but but I think I went through a period of really not knowing. Like when I left Fairhaven, I was like, woof, so that wasn't really quite the right answer for me. And I sort of wore a few other hats along the way and tried those. And I was like, like that's not quite right either. And I would move back and forth across this continuum. And I think the maturity of my exploration of what education could be, should be, and the flexibility that it needs to have, I think all of that has made me able to move into this with a clear sense that I got something to offer here. I didn't just stumble in this with Fairhaven. I think I kind of stumbled into it. I love the ideas. I got involved with Mark and Kim. They moved to Vermont. Here I am. Well, I'm starting a school, And this time it's the intentionality of it and the sense that like I have done the work of being in many different educational environments and many different roles. I know what I'm doing here, and I have a vision that I want to see happen. And at least at the moment, it's not a democratic vision. It's not like, hey, whatever we all want together, let's get together and make a school. It's like we have a vision and a model here and a specific thing that we're about. If you'd like to join and help us happen, that would be fantastic. But this is what we're up to. And so, I think the clarity of mission for me is different because it's something that I own in a way that I didn't own the Sudbury vision. It was somebody else's vision that we were trying to replicate. And I think also just emotional maturity, just like, when you're 30, you haven't had as many bumps and warts. You're not as, you don't have as much sort of humility in the things that have gone wrong. You don't have as much, experience with people of all kinds. And I think all of those just sort of play into it in a way that I don't even know how to articulate. I feel like there's something about like it's coming right from my gut, from my chest, as opposed to I'm trying to fit into this thing that's out there, or figure out a way to be somebody or something in this thing that's external. I don't know if that makes any sense, but that's the feeling I have around it.
Yeah, it does. It does. It very much does, because what I hear in your speaking is, like you said, the bumps and the bruises speak so potently to how experience plays an enormous role in how life unfolds and as we age. And also that speaking you made earlier about being in the unknowing, like that immediate stage following your Fairhaven school experience. Once Fairhaven was formed, I stepped back. I had other things to do in my life, and you stepped in as a part of the staff, and then after a period had left. And I think one element that I felt that you and I shared was that the submarine model was the starting point, and that we would grow and claim it in our own unique ways. And that really wasn't what some others thought about. It was going to be more adherent to a kind of doctrinal honoring of that particular process. And so what I love about your story is, like, Ben described in the bio, your introduction was like you went out and you explored all these different educational models, and the way in which they've kind of congealed. It doesn't just speak to an institutional kind of holding, but really to what you're holding in your being. And I'm kind of curious, like, what were the influences that led you to be so fluid in how you saw the world?
So my father was married twice, and his first wife was very artistic, creative, a little ethereal maybe. And my older siblings were all born in the heart of the baby boomer generation. They were all hardcore hippies. My brother went to Woodstock, they were all. The three younger of us have a different mother who is more sort of practical, and but also, quite sort of ethical and sort of solid in her opinions. And she provided sort of more structure to our lives. And we also were very much influenced by our older siblings, who were passionately like championing all these causes when we were formed as young, little kids, looking up to them. And somehow like they kind of outgrew that sort of idealism and, fighting for social justice kind of thing. And the three of us didn't. Like we really all lived that and continued with it. And I don't know whether it's the difference in mothers or the just generational kind of influence. But then the other piece of it is my father, who was a very smart guy and a little flaky, sort of absent-minded professor guy, which I have inherited a bit of that. But also kind of a moral relativist and very, very exploratory. Didn't believe the rules applied to him. There was an arrogance in that, and a very much, privilege, born kind of, I'm exempt. The rules are for people who don't know how to make decisions for themselves, kind of. Um, but I think that, as much as I have a lot of kind of distaste for that way that he approached life, and it hurt people sometimes, and it was, he sort of saw it as objective in a way that was very male. And I, as a woman, I was really hated the pretending that my opinion, that his opinion was the right one and the objective one, and that anybody else was being irrational and emotional. So there was all kinds of stuff around that. But I think that the thing I took from him that I am grateful for is to maybe not take no for an answer, or just not accept the structures that exist in the world as the only way to do it, and to keep searching and keep challenging and finding ways to do things better. And so that's a sort of complicated collection of influences, I think, of my parents and my family and all of this. And a big part of my sense of wanting to start a charter school, so I should say out loud too that starting Fairhaven was friggin' child's play compared to starting a charter school. Like the scale of accountability and regulations and financial stakes and the personal stakes for families, all of it is just like magnified many, many times. It's terrifying. It's a very challenging process, and most people don't, most people's this conventional wisdom is it's really not possible to start a charter school as a like mom and pop standalone organization these days. It's become so corporate and institutional, and the charter organizations that manage, they have a whole back office staff, just like a school district. And then they have their schools where there's an instructional leader and then, teachers and maybe an operations team. But all of the grant compliance alone takes like, 20 hours a week. So, so anyway, the sort of ballsiness of this is if I didn't have some of my father's willingness to challenge the status quo in a pretty serious way, I don't think I would have been able to engage in this, or at least last in engaging in it.
Yeah. And as you're speaking, I had very little interaction with your dad, a little bit of interaction with your mom. In my brief interactions with your mom, there's also this strong-willedness on her part, like, and clarity.
Yeah, not all is in directions that I loved, but
Yeah, right. But there was there's a real appreciation for like there's this liberal progressive foundation, but then there's this like creative element and independence of thought and pursuit that you were unleashed from, right? Like you were unleashed into the world from that kind of foundational learning that I really admire a great deal because it clearly came from a very highly cultivated place, right? In other words, these weren't just imaginative ideas that all of this came from. There was foundation in all of it and in a level of follow through that not all of us have the gift of receiving. And I don't know that I would call it, in a certain context, privilege or entitlement, but I would call it you were given certain gifts. And I admire that you and your siblings have really used those, what you were given.
right. I know. I used to think I used to sort of kick myself like, why did I just sort of wander in and out of all these different things and, not stick with, one path. And now I look back and it's like, yeah, that's a straight line. That was all, every single piece of what I did is feeding into the work I'm doing now. Yeah.
Right. What are your thoughts in the short term if New Village doesn't come to be? What are your thoughts? What are you feeling?
How do I answer that question? So let me sort of rewind a little bit. So this course of this spring has been so on again, off again. So like literally, I don't know, 25 times we have hit some obstacle that we thought, oh, there it is, it's blowing up, we're done. And then we would find a way around that obstacle, and then literally sometimes within 24 hours, boom, comes the next thing. And lots of it was related to, the federal funding chaos and Trump yanking grants from people, and all of it sort of mostly indirectly affected us. And so it's, way outside of our control. And there was this moment in sort of late March, mid-March, where we were in the middle of this, crazy roller coaster, and I stayed up all night. I was just wide awake all night, and right around 2 in the morning, some switch sort of flipped in me, and it went from, oh my gosh, this isn't happening, and we have to make it happen, or yay, now we've got hope because maybe it is happening because we figured our way around this obstacle. Sort of constant sort of striving, pushing, sort of Sisyphus pushing the rock up the hill, and it would fall down, and then we go again. And there's like this thing flipped in my head, and I was okay with it not happening. And until that point, it had been kind of unacceptable for me. I just was like, no, we're going to make this go. We're going to make it go. We're going to make it go. And I thought that that was going to be a place of peace, that I was only going to be like, yeah, whatever happens. And I was going to be all zen about it. But what got interesting is that it sort of flipped something where when in this roller coaster ride up and down, when things were going up, when it was like hopeful and like, oh, here, this opening happened, or maybe we're going to be able to, this person said something that made us think that maybe we're going to get this loan after all, or whatever. Instead of a sort of little lift and a little excitement, I got a little spike of stress and anxiety. It would go like, "Ugh," and kind of get me in the gut when it was good. And then when the next thing hit, there was almost a relief behind it and part of it was, I think that I had hit a point of burnout, and I've never really understood that word. I know being tired for sure, and I know hating my job for sure, and sort of feeling like, there's no joy in it. But this was like, I physically couldn't like find the thing inside me that could fuel a forward movement. I just couldn't find it. And so when, maybe 3 weeks later was when it was like absolutely clear we hit the wall. We could not open this fall. And at that point, very quickly, the school system said, look, if you want to keep your tenure, now that you're not opening a school, you have to go back in the classroom like now. And I was kind of furious. I felt like, yeah, no, wait, I felt like I just like had a, stillbirth. Like my baby was about to be born and suddenly it's dead. And, give me a minute. And the idea of having to go back into school was just horrible to me. And so I sort of negotiated a couple of weeks to close things down. And then I asked for a school where I thought maybe there's a place in the school district where some of these ideas could come to life. And there's an alternative school called Phoenix Academy in Anne Arundel County that could, if the powers that be were interested in doing so, could actually be a wonderful place to put some of these ideas into practice. But I spent the last month of school there, and I realized it was not going to happen there, and really not in the school district. That the like goalposts are set where everybody is aiming for certain things, and everybody is aiming for. In the case of that school, they're aiming to get students back into traditional school, hopefully at the end of their 45-day placement. But it's all geared towards getting them back into school rather than launching them into the world as successful people who can, be good people, make a living, participate in their community. So that clarity was like, oh, I'm not going to be able to do this, continue this thread in the context of traditional school. It would be going back to being part of that system in a pretty complete way, and being a bit of a cog in the wheel. And you can do a lot of good as a cog in that wheel. You still are interacting with, in my case, I was interacting with 175 kids every 2 days in my classes. That's a lot of kids and a lot of impact, except that I only saw them for, an hour and then they were gone. So I don't know if I want to go back to that or not. I don't know if I want to go back into traditional school, but I do know that the other thing that's kind of unacceptable to me is to do this work outside of the realm where kids who are farthest from opportunity can access it. So, private school or, other kinds of programs that are a step away from what's happening in public schools also don't feel good to me, because that's, heart of hearts, that's who and what I want to serve, is addressing that huge gap in opportunity.
Hi, everyone. If you've been enjoying our podcast, please consider visiting martinperkins.com for more healing and growth resources.
In Language of the Soul, a year-long course I offer to my community, I focus a great deal around helping human beings find their unique expression of self-knowledge. In each of us, there's a unique genius that's ours and ours only. My calling, my expression as a teacher is about helping my students find that unique genius within themselves. There's several ways of taking the course, and I encourage you to explore it if you're a human being seeking to know themselves more deeply.
The course is available both online and in person. Option 1 to taking Language of the Soul is a shared learning format where you and a group of your peers meet online or in person. Option 2 is a one-to-one format of mentee and mentor with acupuncture sessions included, while option 3 is just the one-to-one mentor-mentee.
In my herbal practice, I have been inspired to synthesize a number of approaches in order to serve my clients. At the core is cultivating a healthy microbiome. We begin there. We gather a depth of knowledge, body, mind, and spirit, so that herbal approaches can be offered in the needed order to address the present symptoms while also treating the root causes.
To schedule a consult, you can visit the Herbs and Nutrition page. As burgeoning podcasters, the greatest gift you can offer Martin and I is to share this podcast with just one person. Word of mouth remains the most genuine way to share the art and media that you love and care about. So in advance, we thank you. And now, back to the conversation.
So I'm going to present you with what might seem an absurd thing for someone who's such a creator in the world, and that is, can you imagine a scenario where you just let yourself be for a while? You described at a certain juncture, New Village feeling like it experienced a kind of stillbirth expression within you. It's like there's such loss, and it needs grieving so that we have space so that whatever its new expression in Romey Pittman will be, so that notion of being I know that you've to some degree explored that. Is that even an option on the table for you?
Yeah. I mean, we could survive if I didn't work for a while. The school cycle is such that, that probably means a full year. I can't imagine being in anything other than education, really. So it probably means a year, and that's a little scary financially. But the other thing is I've spent 2 years now. The only real contact I've had with young people has been my youth advisory board, which I kept meeting with every couple weeks and then every month. This group of my former students mostly who were helping to design and launch the school. And then, the occasional meeting of future students, kids whose families were enrolling them. And I miss kids. That needs me. I think stillness is something I really need. And I felt it so strongly this spring as I was sort of trying to kind of rebuild my strength and my kind of even my brain function, just felt like it kind of dissolved for a while. But I also think that a year of being, separate from the thing that I love the most might not actually be the most healing for me. So everybody gets their nourishment in different places. And I'm kind of introverted. It's funny, I've been one of those people who I think this happens to a lot of people if you do Myers-Briggs or those kinds of things. I used to be an extrovert and I've become more and more introverted over time, but I'm not sure that sort of a year without, I'm a worker bee, maybe a workaholic, I thrive on like being in it, and I'm not sure that I want to pull away completely. If I could just hit the pause button and have 3 months, I'd love that. And I had sort of hoped that the summer would be that, but then, things have sort of picked up. And then I also realized if I want to end up in some place, if I am in the school system still, and I try to keep my tenure and my engagement there, and my, 6-figure salary and health insurance. I mean, it's hard to walk away from that too on a practical level. That stuff is, if I'm gonna do that, the timing isn't working out so great to carve out a few months of rest.
Totally understand. Yeah, it just felt like a question that needed to be asked in light of the sense of loss, right? And I want to emphasize to both of you, but also to everyone listening, that the notion of grief, the notion of resting, it's not always about like entirely stepping away from something. It sometimes looks very different in different people's hearts, minds, and souls. And there's no right way to do it, right? I can deeply appreciate how the heart gets fed, especially when it's experienced with younger people, their excitement, their inherent, I would offer, inherent hunger for learning, even if it doesn't always match up with how we want to share it. That's part of the reason why I love your pursuit and wanted to speak to you, because I guess I really wanted as well to like get right to the heart of one aspect of all this, which is what's your 30-second or whatever, like what is that conversation in 30 seconds, a minute, 2 minutes that you share in which you can articulate to someone and say, why is New Village different?
So I think I could do it in a word. Connection.
Connection.
Connection. Yeah. I think that was the thing that didn't quite sit right for me with Fairhaven was that we'd created this little world in this little bubble, and young people were growing up in what we used to talk about, well, the village and the New Village Academy, the village thing is no accident there. The traditional village where young people grew up kind of connecting with the adults that they identified with and kind of being nurtured into their adult identities and their adult careers or whatever you want to call it. And that young people didn't need classes and carrots and sticks to make them become the people that they needed to become. And I think we created the environment where we removed the carrots and sticks and curriculum, but we didn't provide a connection, really. We provided a bunch of sort of pseudo parents, as staff who were people that the young people felt very comfortable with and could, ask for help for things and stuff, but not the adult world and the ways that it operates and, helping young people to grow into that world and to learn how to become successful in that world as opposed to learning how to become successful in our little world. And so that's my ultimate kind of critique of Fairhaven or of the Sudbury model in general, is that it doesn't have enough connection with the outside world. And then my critique of traditional school is the same, which is, or not the same, it comes in a different form, but you got a high school with 2,000 students. You got students who are moving every hour to a new space with new adults and new other students in it, and doing that usually over 2 days in our school system. It's an A-day-B-day model. You might never hear somebody speak your name. Many kids say to me that they never hear anybody speak their name through an entire day. And so the way that we structured this sort of factory model of high school has been just utterly ignored the human need for connection. And so luckily there are like clubs and sports and things like that that kids will plug into to find that community. There'll be a theater kid or there'll be a whatever, but that many students don't find that. They never find that. And sometimes the things that they find are actually not very nurturing and constructive for communities. And they don't really develop connections with adults for the most part. Some do. I had lots of kids who would, of course, spend their lunch period with me hanging out in my room when I went back into the classroom at Annapolis High School. But that was accidental. That was, then that was maybe 30, 40 kids who I had that relationship with where we would sit and talk and just listen to each other. And then I think we also in traditional school also have the same problem where it's a bubble, right? They don't really have mechanisms for kids to be going in and out of school, out into the community and incorporating that learning that they do out there into what's happening in school. And so all that is to me one of the cores. I think there's a couple of them really, but one of the cores of what we're trying to be up to with New Village Academy is to newly recreate the village where people know each other, where everybody takes responsibility for young people's growth, where young people get to connect with the adults who they resonate with and, get mentored into careers and into being adults, into adulthood in ways that feel good to them. And where the school itself is small enough that everybody knows each other's name, that the school has got mechanisms. So we have a structure called crew, which I stole from my work with expeditionary learning. And it's the idea is we're crew, not passengers. So we're all like active participants in this boat that we're in together. And so it's a metaphor, not just for this small group of 14 students and one teacher who stay together all 4 years, but also for like, how do you go through life is, get in the boat and be crew, But anyway, the structure of crew, who's 14 students and one teacher, enables the kids and very often parents, especially if like they don't speak English or if they live in a housing project across town, like and don't have a car, or it's so hard for families to feel connected to school too. And so having this one person, this one adult who becomes the connecting point for families into the school, for students to have an adult who is like their kind of mama or papa in school, holds them accountable, for them to have a group that holds each other accountable and builds a real sense of community and shared values. All of that to me is about building kind of a foundation in this world where connection is so scarce. I mean, with social media, with the structure of school in general, but then with kids spending so much time on social media, the lack of human connection is terrifying. And I think it's what's creating our political world that we're in. It's what is disconnecting us in terms of our relationship to our planet, and literally will be the thing that destroys us. So that's really the thing that I'm most fierce about in our school, in the design of the school. This guy who worked for Expeditionary Learning, there was this quote that everybody loved, which was, to start a school is to declare what it means to be human. I think in each of the schools that I've been involved in founding, there's a slightly different sort of vision of what does it mean to be human. To me, New Village Academy, the vision there is what it means to be human is to be connected to each other and in relationship with each other. I guess the caveat around connection is that it's not a simple thing. That connection involves relationships between people, and those are always complicated. And I think the other component that is at the core of New Village Academy, and I guess my thinking throughout my life, is power, I guess, would be another way to think about it. There was a very clarifying moment for me when I was back in the classroom at Annapolis High School. So in 2019, I went back to the classroom to kind of get my chops back and get plugged in the local community and feel like I was sort of setting a foundation from which to launch this charter idea. But I was, teaching social studies, and I had a kid who was just driving me bananas in my class. It was a, young Black man, ninth grader, didn't never do the work, always talking back, always, side talking, starting fights with, not fights, physical fights in my classroom, but starting, confrontations with people, just drive me nuts, And so one day it just got the better of me. I generally is pretty good at keeping my cool, but it just like pushed some button, and I was pissed. And I got down low, like at the level, close to his desk. And I was mad, and I was talking to him, and I was like, you need to do this. And some little thing sort of jolted through me, and I was like, oh my God, what am I doing? It suddenly sort of the picture in my mind sort of hit me very clearly that here was this, white woman in a position of authority, in a system of authority, that gave me power on so many different levels. And this young man who's emerging into adulthood, trying to find his own power and his own, dignity and self-respect. And I was, pushing back on that, and wanting him to give up his power, give up his authority and his integrity. And that what we were doing had 400-year-old coattails, for both of us, in a very unconscious, and, for me in that moment, suddenly conscious ways, where I was, as a white woman who has spent literally my entire life, since the age of 7, I think, learning about and working on and thinking about issues of race and power and, history, and grappling with that because of my own family's history. That even having done that work, or whatever, like they used to talk about in the post-COVID, like who's done the work, and even feeling like I really have done a lot of that work, I was suddenly catapulted into a situation where I was in automatic pilot. I was mad, and I was asserting my authority with all of the tools that I had at my disposal, and then here was this young man who was also had all those historical coattails of being caught in a system that was trying to do education to him instead of, helping him achieve education. And I was this mechanism of enforcing that power all over him. And for him to be pushing back, like, of course he was, of course, because, every kind of cell in his body was telling him this is wrong, and I need to fight for my survival and my integrity and my clarity. And regardless of, he was totally in the wrong. Like, he was being a pain in the butt in my class, but he was absolutely in the right too. And so that moment, that was sort of a perfect microcosm for me of this, of just how incredibly difficult it is to have connection and healthy connection in a school dynamic where there are these power relationships, and education is being done to kids, quite literally, as opposed to students doing their education. And there are racial dynamics that play out in that are super complicated, especially in situations where teachers or people in authority, school leaders, are white and students are Black and brown. So because of that, like part of the sort of structure of New Village Academy is very much pulling from Sudbury, which is believing that young people are inherently curious, that they are inherently want to be successful in their lives, and that our role should not be figuring out how to make them do what we want them to do, but our role should be supporting them to identify and cultivate and move toward what they see as the future that they want for themselves. And all of us learning how to do that well and do that in a way that always puts, really, it's a body of research. It's a scientific kind of body of research around what enables people to feel motivated intrinsically and to really put that at the center of what we're up to.
Right. And recognizing that, at least through my learning as a consciousness teacher, is the recognition that no two people grow and heal in the same precise ways. That we really, as you're describing this notion of connection, is meeting them where they are. And yet at the same time, recognizing that there are certain foundational aspects to the act of learning and allowing that to gel. For instance, if we apply it to like consciousness learning, my experience is, first and foremost, if someone's not well rested, it's really hard to do the basic work that it requires, right? So I always start with, let's work with the notion of resting. And so I suspect there are foundational pieces that apply to your model as well. Is that correct?
For sure. We do have definitely things that are foundational. Part of it is the external societal requirements. They're still in a public school. They still have to take a test in 10th grade. They still have to have a diploma with credits on it. So we had to figure out a sort of workaround where we have skill competencies that people have to demonstrate rather than I sat my butt in the seat for a semester in biology, and so I have a biology credit. Constraints around that, which is a little different from what you're talking about, which are like that, we need this as a foundational starting point for our work. And, certainly there are those things too. We will have a lot of mindfulness work that is part of the sort of routine of crew, and a lot of, because there's a basic sort of level of, being able to self-regulate, that part of, being foundational to being able to figure out what you even want in your life and, envision that and all of that. But I think the starting place being like the answers are inside of that person, not inside of me. And I got to figure out a way to get them into that person. The school effort has been very much collective effort of Black, white, and Latino for the most part people, because that's the community that the school will serve, and also just friends and people, community partners who are going to work with the school, and parents who are going to send their kids to the school. It's been so interesting how, for the most part, white friends and connections have said, "Oh, Romey, you poor thing, you've worked so hard. You really, need a break." Sort of, thinking very much about it in terms of like how giving me permission to walk away, kind of. And then the people in the Black community, for the most part, again, not everybody, but many, are like, "You can't give up. You got to keep going." Like you've got to, find a way around this. There's no, that's like 100 biblical quotes and, sayings and whatever that are like, keep going, keep going. And, it finally sort of gelled for me, like, of course, because like it is, so central to the Black experience that you try to do stuff and you keep getting told no, and the things keep getting in the way, and the funding gets taken away, and all the things that have happened to us are things that are so familiar to anybody who's trying to make change in the Black community. And so that the resilience and determination and like, yeah, there are setbacks, and that doesn't mean it's over.
Thank you. It's been an honor to kind of be with you on that journey.
I am so grateful for being able to be part of this conversation. It's been so much fun and so, I don't know, kind of affirming. Like it's been so sweet to be able to just share my own personal journey in all these different ways and have you all contribute to that.
To find out more about New Village Academy and updates on the future of the school, you can visit newvillageacademy.org. Language of the Soul, Conversations on Healing and Growth is produced by Ben Umstead and Martin Perkins, with editing and music by Ben Umstead.